At 59, David Carson was worth $5 million. He had homes, properties, and a perfect portfolio. But all that money couldn't buy him one thing: a partner. So he went online and met Isabella. 8 months later, that love cost him $1.2 million and everything he thought he knew about trust. This is the terrifying true story of the financial trap David walked into. David had everything most men dream of, except someone to share it with. His life looked perfect on paper: 3 rental properties, a lakefront home with white oak floors, and an investment portfolio worth a little over $5 million. He had built it all from the ground up, starting in his late 20s as a modest real estate agent in Cleveland, Ohio, driving a secondhand Ford and knocking on doors to find clients. Over the years, his grit and discipline turned small commissions into an empire of quiet success, but money can't fill silence. And for David, silence had become the loudest thing in his life. He would come home to his large, echoing lake house, drop his keys on the granite counter, and hear only the hum of the refrigerator. No laughter, no footsteps, just the sound of time passing. He wasn't bitter, not yet, but he often wondered how his life became so empty. He had a few serious relationships in his 40s, but each one fell apart, usually because he was too busy, too practical, too focused on work. He told himself he was building for the future, but now the future had arrived, and it was lonely. As he approached 60, retirement began to look less like freedom and more like a sentence of solitude. His friends were hosting family dinners and attending their grandkids' school plays. David, on the other hand, spent his evenings and weekends trying to buy a few hours of connection. He occasionally invited women over, acquaintances from his social circle, or sometimes a lady he'd met at a high-end pub. He was a rich man who commanded attention, and his invitations were rarely declined. But the mornings were always the same: a quick, awkward breakfast, a strained conversation about their work, and then a quiet, expensive Uber ride back across town. He felt the cold air return to the house the moment the door clicked shut behind them. He was paying to briefly interrupt the silence. He was buying companionship but never getting connection. Every encounter only deepened his sense of isolation, serving as a reminder that what he was truly looking for, genuine, uncomplicated warmth, couldn't be listed on a balance sheet. He would eat microwave dinners and pour himself a glass of whiskey, convincing himself he was content, but deep down he wasn't. One lonely evening, while browsing the internet after dinner, he stumbled upon an ad for an international dating site. At first, he laughed. "I'm not that desperate," he thought, but an hour later, curiosity, or maybe quiet desperation, pushed him to sign up. He wasn't searching for someone glamorous, just someone kind, maybe younger, maybe foreign, someone who still believed in loyalty and love. That's when he met Isabella, a 28-year-old from Cebu, Philippines. Her profile photo stopped him cold. Soft brown eyes, a shy smile, and a caption that read, "Looking for someone real." He sent a polite message, not expecting a reply, but she answered within minutes. That night, they talked for hours about life, faith, family, dreams. She called him Sir David, a mix of respect and affection that melted something inside him. No one had spoken to him with that kind of gentleness in years. They began chatting every day, their conversations stretching late into the night. She told him about her life, how she worked small gigs to support her mother and younger brother, how she dreamed of stability, of a quiet life with a man who loves her for who she is. Her warmth disarmed him. She wasn't like the women he'd met before. No demands, no complaints, no sarcasm, just soft words and attention. David's friends noticed the change in him. He was smiling again, buying new shirts, even humming at the office. When they found out about Isabella, the teasing began. "You're about to become somebody's retirement plan," one friend joked. David laughed it off. "She's not like that," he said. And when someone asked if she'd asked for money, he proudly said, "Not a cent." In his mind, that proved everything. He didn't see that her greatest weapon wasn't what she asked for. It was what she didn't. After 6 months of constant calls, laughter, and late-night confessions, David decided to fly to the Philippines. He booked a first-class ticket for $6,200 and a $3,000 hotel stay at a luxury hotel in Manila. He wanted it to be special, not just a visit, but a gesture that said, "I'm serious about you." When he stepped off the plane and saw her waiting with flowers in her hands, everything inside him said this was real. She was even more stunning in person. Delicate features, a graceful walk, and eyes that seemed to carry both innocence and gratitude. During their time together, she was attentive and affectionate. She laughed at his jokes, held his hand in public, and listened when he spoke. For the first time in years, David felt alive. He took her to seaside cafes, they walked on the beach at sunset, and she told him stories about her childhood, the kind that made him picture her as a little girl chasing waves with bare feet. It was there, at a small cafe overlooking the sea, that he proposed. No fancy speech, just trembling hands, teary eyes, and a quiet, "Will you marry me?" Her reaction, the tears, the smile, the way she said, "Yes, Sir David," while covering her mouth, made him feel 20 years younger. Within 3 months after securing all the paperwork, David and Isabella were legally married in the Philippines. He spent nearly $12,000 on the ceremony, the documents, and her visa process. He didn't care about the money. He told his friends, "I've worked all my life. I can finally spend it on someone who matters." His closest friend, Jeff, tried to caution him. "Just make sure you know who you're marrying, Dave. Loneliness makes smart men blind." David smiled and replied, "I know what I'm doing." But deep down he didn't, because loneliness doesn't make you stupid. It just makes you hope. When Isabella arrived in the United States months later, David waited at the airport with flowers and a heart that felt 20 again. He decorated his home with lilies, her favorite, filled the fridge with Filipino food, and whispered to her as they walked inside, "This is your home now." She kissed his cheek and smiled. He didn't see the faint hesitation in her eyes. That night, as she unpacked in the guest room, she turned into her space. David poured himself a drink and whispered to himself, "This time, I got it right." He had no idea he was walking straight into a legal trap, one that would soon cost him far more than love ever could. By the time Isabella finally stepped foot in Cleveland, David had spent over $6,200 just on her travel and processing. He met her at the airport with a small bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, according to one of their endless late-night chats. She looked radiant, far more striking in person than on the screen. Her laughter was light, practiced almost, but to David it sounded like music after years of silence. He felt younger just standing beside her. Within 2 weeks, she'd settled into his suburban home, a 2-story house with a warm fireplace sitting on half an acre in a quiet neighborhood. David had bought it 3 years earlier after selling part of his IT consultancy firm. The place had always felt too big for one person. Now, with Isabella around, it felt alive again. She brought color into his world, literally. She replaced his gray curtains with cream ones, rearranged furniture, filled the home with the scented candles. David didn't realize it, but she was subtly making the house hers. He took her shopping, not extravagantly, but generously. He spent $4,500 in the first month on new clothes, a phone, and a few essentials. She would often say, "You've worked so hard, you deserve a woman who looks her best for you," and that line disarmed him every time. Still, there were small things, barely noticeable at first. She was often on her phone late at night speaking in Tagalog. When David asked, she'd say, "It's my mother. She worries about me." He never pressed further. Once his friend Mark, a blunt and pragmatic man, dropped by for coffee. He joked, "She's beautiful, man. Just be careful. You don't want to end up in one of those overseas marriage cautionary tales." David chuckled, masking the flicker of doubt that flashed in his mind. "She's different, Mark," he said. "I know what people say, but this feels real." And maybe that was David's flaw, his need to believe. After years of corporate wins and steady profits, he wasn't used to losing, especially not in matters of the heart. 3 months later, they married in a small ceremony at St. Mary's Cathedral, downtown Cleveland. David wore a classic navy suit. Isabella glowed in white satin. Her friends from the Filipino community were there. 3 women he'd never met until that day. They took pictures, laughed, and sang karaoke that night at the reception. When they got home, Isabella told him softly, "You've changed my life, David." He smiled, holding her hand. "You've changed mine, too." It was true. She had changed his life. He just didn't know how completely yet. Within a year, she'd convinced him to co-sign for a 2021 Mercedes-Benz C-Class. "A gift for us," she'd said. The car cost $29,800, paid in installments that David barely noticed coming out of his account. Every month she sent $800 back home to her family. He never questioned it. He told himself it was her way of giving back, of staying connected to her roots. But love, when blind, often rewrites logic. There were dinners where she seemed distant, where her smile didn't reach her eyes. Sometimes she'd cancel date nights last minute, saying she felt tired or had errands. David would eat alone at the kitchen counter, scrolling through photos of their early days, wondering if this was what love looked like. Comfort without closeness. Yet, every time he doubted, she'd find a way to reassure him. A gentle hug, a whispered, "I love you." And suddenly, his worries dissolved. He thought marriage was about trust. She thought marriage was about timing. And in her quiet calculation, that time was running out. The first cracks appeared quietly, not with shouting, not with slammed doors, but with silence. It began 6 months after their first anniversary. David noticed Isabella spent more time scrolling on her phone, laughing at messages she never explained. Her phone was now locked, something she'd never done before. When he asked, half joking, "Who's keeping you smiling that much?" She smiled back, but there was an edge in her tone. "Don't start, David. It's just my cousins from back home." He wanted to believe her. He needed to. But there was something hollow in her laughter, something that no longer belonged to him. Then came the money questions. She began asking for small things, an extra $2,000 to help her brother start a business, another $1,200 for a medical emergency. David, who was worth over $5 million, thought nothing of it at first. What was a few $1,000s compared to the love of his life? But the truth was she had stopped calling him love. She now called him David, like a colleague. One night he walked into the living room to find her packing. "What's going on?" he asked. Her voice was cool, almost rehearsed. "I'm going to stay with my friend for a while. I need space." David's chest tightened. "Space? From what? Did I do something wrong?" She sighed. "You don't understand me, David. You're controlling. You don't let me breathe." The irony cut deep. David had given her freedom, luxury, and a home, yet here she was, painting him as a cage. When she left that night, taking 2 suitcases, David stood in the doorway, watching her Uber's red taillights fade into the dark. He had no idea it was the beginning of the end. Weeks passed with no word. He called, texted, even visited her friend's apartment. No one answered. Until one afternoon, a thick envelope arrived, stamped Cuyahoga County Family Court. Notice of dissolution of marriage, petition for divorce and equitable distribution of marital property. David sat at his kitchen counter, frozen. The papers said irreconcilable differences. She'd filed through her lawyer. No warning, no discussion. Just a legal strike. According to the letter, Isabella was seeking half of his assets, claiming she had contributed significantly to the marriage and sacrificed her financial independence. Half of $5 million. Money he'd earned over 40 years of hard work. David's world went silent. He reread the letter again and again. It felt like fiction, like a bad dream. He called Isabella's phone. Again, no answer. He drove to her friend's apartment. No one answered. The next day, she posted a smiling selfie on Facebook with the caption, "Starting a new chapter." That was the moment David realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a setup. And the worst part? Legally, she might actually win. He called Mark, his friend, his voice shaking. "Mark, she's suing me. She's asking for half of my assets." Mark exhaled deeply. "I told you to be careful, man. You didn't sign a prenup, did you?" David's silence said everything. He remembered the night he'd proposed, how she'd said, "We don't need papers to prove love." He'd smiled back then. Now he realized those words were her insurance policy. Within a week, David found himself sitting in the oak-paneled office of Mitchell and Graves, a mid-sized family law firm in Cleveland. He was still shaking when the attorney, a gray-haired man named Alan Graves, flipped through the divorce petition. "She's asking for equitable distribution, alimony, and attorney's fees," Alan said, adjusting his glasses. "Because she's been here less than a year, we can fight the alimony. But Ohio is an equitable distribution state. That means fair, not necessarily equal, yet judges often see fair as 50-50. David blinked, stunned. 8 months of marriage, and she could take half of everything I've built in 40 years? Alan nodded slowly. If we don't settle, it could cost you over $100,000 in legal fees alone. If we do settle, she might walk away with $1 to $2 million. Either way, you'll bleed. The words hit harder than any argument ever could. The legal process moved fast. Isabella's lawyer filed motions demanding full disclosure of David's bank statements, tax returns, property deeds, investment accounts, everything. She claimed she'd supported him emotionally and gave up her earning potential by moving to America. David provided all the documents. His total assets came to roughly $5.2 million, including $1.8 million in real estate holdings, $2.1 million in investments, $800,000 in retirement accounts, $500,000 in cash savings. The next month, Isabella's attorney accused him of concealing assets because his cryptocurrency wallet showed small transfers to a brokerage app. He hadn't even remembered those, $14,000 in total, but now every dollar was a weapon against him. Alan warned him, "Divorce law isn't about truth. It's about documentation and presentation. She's painting herself as the vulnerable immigrant who trusted a wealthy man and was abandoned." David stared at the conference table, fists clenched. "She's the one who left. She's the one who planned this." Alan sighed. "Doesn't matter what you know, David. It's what you can prove." David felt the walls closing in. He noticed her hand trembling slightly when she signed one of the documents. For a moment, he thought, maybe deep down, she felt guilt. But then she looked away. She wouldn't even meet his eyes. And that was the final cut. Not the betrayal, not the loss of money, but her refusal to even acknowledge him. When the case went to court, the atmosphere was tense but quiet. The kind of silence that amplifies every shuffle of paper, every sigh. David sat at the defendant's table, trying to keep calm. Isabella, sitting across the room, avoided his gaze. She wore a soft beige dress, her hair tied back neatly, her face unreadable. He looked at her, searching for the woman he'd once known, but all he saw was strategy. The judge, an older woman named Judge Reynolds, adjusted her glasses. Her tone was steady, but there was a flicker of sympathy when she looked at Isabella, and that flicker broke something inside David. Isabella testified through tears about loneliness, cultural isolation, and emotional neglect. Her attorney argued, "My client gave up her entire life to move here. She was promised partnership, security, and support. Instead, she was controlled financially and emotionally." David wanted to shout, but Alan squeezed his arm. "Let it go," he whispered. "Anger looks bad on the record." He wanted to scream, to explain that he wasn't the villain she painted him to be, that he had only loved, provided, and believed. But in court, love has no currency. Only paperwork does. When it was David's turn, he tried to explain how he'd bought her the car, opened accounts in her name, paid for her visa, supported her every step. But each gesture of generosity was twisted into control or financial dominance. By the end of the hearing, David could see where this was headed. The judge urged both parties to reach an amicable settlement to avoid unnecessary costs. Translation: pay her and move on. After weeks of negotiation, Isabella agreed to settle. Her demands: $1.2 million lump sum payment, retention of the Mercedes-Benz, an additional $25,000 for relocation and emotional distress. Alan ran the numbers. "If you fight, you'll spend nearly that much on trial prep. Take the deal, protect what's left." David felt hollow signing the papers. One signature, and nearly a quarter of his life savings vanished. When the settlement was finalized, Isabella's attorney smiled politely, shook his hand, and said, "No hard feelings. Just business." As they exited the courtroom, Isabella walked past him without a word. No glance, no goodbye. Just the faint scent of her perfume lingering like a ghost of a life he used to have. His house now felt completely empty. The walls echoed differently, colder, quieter. David stood in the living room that used to smell like vanilla candles and coffee, now stripped of everything that once felt alive. The curtains she had chosen were gone. Even the mirror near the staircase, the one where she used to check her hair before stepping out, was taken. He'd lost a quarter of his assets, and more painfully, the peace of mind that once came with trust. From being worth over $5 million, he was now just a man worth roughly $3.5 million after the court settlement. To most, that was still wealth. But to David, who had built his fortune through discipline and calculation, it felt like losing a limb. He wasn't ruined, but he was wrecked. 2 months later, he saw her on social media again. She'd moved to Los Angeles, smiling in front of a new condo captioned, "Fresh start. Dreams do come true." The car he'd bought was parked right behind her. For the first time in years, he sat at his desk with no plan, no projections, no strategy. Just silence, and the sound of rain tapping the window. He stared at his reflection in the glass, tired eyes, graying stubble, and a faint scar of disbelief carved into his face. He kept replaying moments. The way she laughed, the way she'd say, "I love you," so effortlessly. Was it ever real? Or had it always been a performance rehearsed for a payout? Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he'd reach for his phone, almost texting her name, before stopping himself. He'd heard from a Filipino acquaintance that she'd been spotted vacationing with another man, rumored to be her boyfriend, even before she left him. The words stung, but strangely, they also gave him closure. It meant the story had always been bigger than him. He was just a chapter in someone else's plan. He didn't hate her. He hated the system that allowed love to become litigation. When the final court documents arrived by mail, David didn't open them right away. They sat on his kitchen counter for 3 days, thick, stamped, and official, like a tombstone for the life he thought he'd built. When he finally tore the envelope open, the words felt unreal. Case fully closed. No pending obligations, just 6 words. But they marked the official end of a marriage that cost him over $1.2 million in settlement, plus another $35,000 in legal fees. He'd lost the equivalent of 20 years of savings in less than a year, all because he believed in love. He had a drink while leaning back in his chair, letting out a long breath. This was freedom. Expensive, brutal, but freedom nonetheless. In the months that followed, David became something of a quiet expert in family law, not by choice, but by survival. He learned how the equitable distribution system in many U.S. states can devastate older, wealthier spouses who marry without protection. He discovered that in most jurisdictions, it doesn't matter how long you were married. If the union is legal, the financial ties are binding. He met with another attorney who told him plainly, "You made 3 mistakes, David. 1. You married without a prenup. 2. You put her name on shared accounts. 3. You believed love protects you more than the law." That last sentence haunted him for weeks. He realized too late that emotions fade, but contracts remain. Love may be sincere, but money always leaves a trail. Those words stayed with him. One evening, nearly a year later, he drove past St. Mary's Cathedral, the same church where they had married. The lights were off. The street was quiet. For a moment, he parked nearby and just sat there, staring at the empty steps. He thought about how love had once brought him joy and ruin, how it had humbled him in ways no business loss ever could. He wasn't bitter anymore, just aware. He realized that Isabella didn't take his success. She only exposed how fragile emotional blindness could make even the smartest men. He turned the ignition, smiled faintly, and drove away. Slower this time, more deliberate. The past was behind him now, a lesson wrapped in perfume and deception. Months later, he'd hear from a mutual acquaintance that Isabella had tried to remarry, but her new partner found out about her past and left. David didn't react, he just nodded quietly, feeling a strange mix of pity and peace. Because by then, he had already rebuilt, not his fortune, but his clarity. In a quiet voice, almost to himself, he once told Mark over dinner, "You know what I learned, Mark? Love's not the enemy. Trust isn't either. The danger is thinking you can buy sincerity, that if you give enough, someone will stay. I gave her the world, but she was only ever renting it. A marriage license is a legal contract, not a promise of forever." Mark raised his glass. "To lessons paid in full," he said. David smiled faintly. "With interest," he replied. He still believes in love. He just believes in signatures, documents, and prenups a little more. Thanks for listening to David's story. If this opened your eyes, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, trust is priceless, but in court, everything has a price tag.